So, what are you when you are not performing? It's a pretty wild thought, right? I mean, every single day we wake up and put on these garments daughter, wife, mother, professional and we perform these roles so incredibly well that we kind of trick ourselves into believing they are our raw, true identities. But what actually happens when you strip all those costumes away? What's really left? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into that exact question through the lens of three absolutely visionary authors, Virginia Woolf, Kate Chopin, and Clarice Lispector. Even though they were separated by language, geography, and history, these three women completely shattered the illusion of a solid identity. They mapped the terrifying, beautiful coordinates of the interior life, and they did it by creating three highly distinct, revolutionary spatial metaphors. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the illusion of self. Then we'll move through our three spatial metaphors, Woolf and the Lighthouse, Chopin and the Gulf, and Lispector and the Egg. After that, we'll dive into breaking the novel before bringing it all together with Maps of the Void. Okay, let's jump into section 1, the illusion of self, unmasking the performance. Think about the actual self as a physical geography. For Virginia Woolf, the self is a lighthouse. It's a vertical distance. Picture a luminous tower viewed across time and water. It organizes everything around its beam, but it's fundamentally unreachable. You row toward it, but it always remains at a distance. Now contrast that with Kate Chopin. She envisioned a gulf. This is a horizontal expansion. You wade into it, out past the point where your feet can even touch the bottom. It represents total autonomy, for sure, but also complete erasure. It's an infinite horizon that just recedes with every single stroke you take. But then we have Clarice Lispector, who throws a total curveball with a fascinating third way. If Woolf is vertical and Chopin is horizontal, Lispector is a total implosion to the nucleus. She imagined the self stripped completely down to a small, oval, perfect egg just sitting in a room. It contains everything, and yet it desires absolutely nothing. To touch it is to destroy it, but to leave it untouched is to remain forever outside the truth. Moving on to section 2, Woolf and the Lighthouse, the geometry of arrival. In her 1927 novel, To the Lighthouse, Virginia Woolf does something incredible. She structures the narrative around time and consciousness itself instead of a standard linear plot. The story centers around Mrs. Ramsay's dinner party, and Woolf uses it to show us that consciousness doesn't just move forward, it spirals. The big revelation here is that the journey itself is the answer. The self you're walking toward, well, it's always just a memory by the time you actually get there. And brilliantly, Woolf relegates death and trauma to mere brackets in the text. Why? Because that is exactly how death arrives in real life, as this abrupt, almost bureaucratic interruption to the story you thought you were living. Virginia Woolf really hit the nail on the head with this realization, for nothing was simply one thing. She understood that the self isn't just a single static destination. I mean, the lighthouse is a building, yes, but it is also a broken promise. It's a dead mother. It's an endured marriage. The self is just this complex, ever-changing pattern of light and shadow. Let's pivot to section 3, Chopin and the Gulf, the infinite ocean. Kate Chopin mapped a totally different territory, an ocean of autonomy. Her 1899 novel, The Awakening, follows Edna Pontellier. Now, Edna is a woman who wakes up and realizes that being a dutiful wife and mother are just costumes society handed her. When she finally learns to swim in the warm water of the Gulf of Mexico, she discovers her own sovereign body and her autonomy. But she also realizes something terrifying. Returning to the shore means willingly returning to a cage. So she makes a choice. She chooses the infinite horizon, swimming out past the breakers and merging completely with the indifferent sea. Just listen to this absolute mic drop of a quote. I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself. It's a radical, staggering distinction. Edna is perfectly willing to sacrifice her physical life, but she absolutely refuses to sacrifice her actual sovereign self. As you can imagine, choosing selfhood over the performance of selflessness, that completely scandalized society back in 1899. Which brings us to section 4, Lispector and the Egg, implosion to the nucleus. Clarice Lispector goes even further. She strips away all human decoration until literally nothing but raw, vibrating existence remains. She calls this state the neutral. It's the place before categories even exist. It's where human and animal, clean and dirty, beautiful and ugly are all revealed to be made of the exact same indifferent substance. It's the stark realization that meaning just isn't inherent. To reach this state of the neutral, Lispector's protagonist, GH, undergoes a wildly intense philosophical breakdown that revolves entirely around a cockroach. First, there's disgust. She views the roach as the ultimate other. But then, that shifts into recognition. She realizes the roach is actually kin, it's alive, vibrating with the very same existence she is. That quickly spirals into horror as she realizes that human superiority in our neat little categories are just an arbitrary lie. And finally, we see the complete dissolution of her performed self into pure neutral matter. She essentially cracks the egg of selfhood and finds absolutely no soul inside, just the raw substance of being. And right at the center of that nucleus, she comes to this incredible realization: I am before I am the thing that I am. Underneath every single role we play, there is just the hum of existence. You are, quite literally, the exact same substance as the roach and the egg. Section 5. Breaking the Novel. Architectures of Consciousness. What's so amazing here is that these authors didn't just philosophize about all this. They had to actively break the rules of literature to tell the truth. Notice how each of their spatial metaphors perfectly aligns with a massive literary innovation. Woolf's Lighthouse required her to fracture time, totally abandoning the traditional linear plot. Chopin's Gulf required her to flat-out refuse moral redemption. She simply wouldn't let the narrative punish Edna for her desires. And Lispector's Egg? Well, that required her to turn language against itself, just to describe a state before language even exists. So, to quickly summarize how they pulled this off, Woolf broke time, transforming it into a cyclical rhythm. Chopin broke morality, presenting Edna's ultimate choice as a consummation rather than a tragedy. And Lispector broke language, relying on this highly associative, mystical syntax. The biggest takeaway here, the result is novels that absolutely do not comfort us. They demand that we face the terrifying, yet totally liberating truth that the self is an illusion. And that brings us to our final part, Section 6, Maps of the Void, the Cartography of Absence. So, what do we actually do with this knowledge? How do we live in a world where the self is just a costume? Well, it helps to look at the women in these stories who didn't drown or dissolve. Take Lily Briscoe in Woolf's novel. She paints a single line on a canvas just to capture the sheer distance of loss. Adele Ratignolle in Chopin's novel clearly sees the cage of society, but she consciously chooses it because it contains the laughter of her children. The maid in Lispector's novel draws stick figures in charcoal, making art in the margins of her exhausting life. Art doesn't magically save them, but you know what? It gives them a place to put the vertigo. It gives them a way to live in the distance. And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway from all of this incredible source material. The self is not a place you arrive at. It is the distance itself. We are always rowing toward the lighthouse. We're always swimming toward the horizon or orbiting the egg, but we never actually arrive. The looking, the rowing, the swimming, that distance itself is where we actually live our lives. So, now that you have this map of the interior, I want to leave you with this. How will you navigate the distance between the self you perform every day and the self you actually are? Will you keep rowing? Will you wade into the gulf? Or will you crack the egg? The map is yours to use.